What the Tech is brought to you by Text Expander. Text Expander helps you communicate smarter. Visit textexpander.com/podcast for 20% off your first year.
What's the tech?
Everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian. Of course, I'm joined by Mr. Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
Pretty good.
That's all that we can hope for. That's all we can hope for right now.
So that's as good as it's getting.
Crazy times, but we're here. We're doing a show. A lot of tech to talk about. Paul, how's your week been? Good? Hanging in?
Andrew, I'm not exaggerating when I say, yeah, I get up every day. Let me think about this. I think it was this morning. I woke up laying in bed and I thought, thank God it's the weekend. Oh, right. It's just the way it is. Yeah, it's just not, I don't know. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
How about you? I'm going to tell you, we're getting closer to opening here in New York. We're in phase one now. I think on Friday, 5 different counties are going to go to phase 3, upstate New York. Long Island probably going to phase 3. Long Island, Westchester going to phase 3 in about, 10 days, 11 days from today. So, things are it's opening up. So we'll see. We're at the end of this. Just hang on tight, guys.
Well, we're at the beginning of the end. I mean,
beginning of the end of the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end? I mean, we've seen, unfortunately, that in places that have opened up early, they're seeing more cases, So I don't know. It seems like the whole planet wants to just move ahead. It's like, screw it. We've had enough.
Yeah.
Which I kind of get, but we still got to be smart about this.
Yeah. So, I guess we'll start with that big Apple story here, right? Because I really want to talk about this. This is something that you and I have spoken about for, God, since I want to say 9 years, 8 years, that this is what we saw it becoming. We knew as soon as Apple started with the iPhone and with the iPad that they were slowly evolving into possibly having their own chipsets on their MacBook line, their Mac, computer line. And it seems like it's happening. They're going to announce it this year. They're going to announce it at this year's WWDC. I want to get your thoughts on this because this could possibly be great for them because they have their own chip and they're refining the operating system to be more, in tune with iOS and how they handle everything. So I want to get your opinion on this because this is a positive and a negative at the same time. But
okay.
I would have said a couple.
Well, actually, let's start there. Let's start there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious. What's the negative for you?
The negative is obviously the negative is always going to be performance, right? That's going to be the big question here. But if this was 5 years ago, I think it would have been a tremendous negative.
Right.
If this was their point 5 years ago to say, okay, listen, we're going to transition to our own ARM chipsets. No more Intel. This is going to be the Mac line. There would have been a lot of resistance from the user base because obviously going to Intel was probably part of their big boom here. Obviously it is, but Intel made it more friendly for PC users to go over. Emulation worked better. Overall, everything worked better. But now to kind of take that step backwards, going to ARM, hardware emulation has gotten way better. Software emulation has gotten way better if you need to run software. But the reality is, Apple's running their own system anyway, and you're running Apple apps anyway, so why not? I want to get your opinion because obviously we could talk about this and we're going to go into more detail here.
It's a huge topic. I mean,
tremendous.
So there's by the way, we should say, that they may be announcing this next week is based on a report from Bloomberg, which is credible, but they may still not announce it, right? So, it's possible after all this excitement, next week will come and go or whenever, I guess it's 2 weeks from Monday, I think. Sorry, 2 weeks from Monday, or a week from Monday, right? So we're about 10 days away. They may not announce it, but we know they've been working on this, and we know that Microsoft, in partnership with Qualcomm, has brought Windows 10 to ARM, and we can see by the mistakes that they've made and by how well that's gone, the challenges that Apple faces, and we can kind of speculate as to how they might respond to that stuff. So I think this goes back to the original iPad. Few people remember this, but this was in the Jobs biography. They considered running that thing on Intel. Um, that could possibly have been released as an Atom-based device, right?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges they had was, well, do these A series chips that we have at the time, you can remember this is 10 years ago.
Which
are they powerful enough?
Which one would it have been 10 years ago?
I don't even know, but they might not have even had these names yet because the iPhone had just come out in 2007. So it's 3 gens in, Apple, I don't remember when Apple bought that company. I've forgotten the name now, the company that was making their chips. I mean, at that time, well, Apple had probably bought them. In fact, I'm sure by the time that they decided to, off the top of my head, I would have to guess that once they realized they were going to stick with these ARM-based chips for the iPad as well as the iPhone, they probably said, look, we need to, we need to own this company.
Yeah.
And we need to, because they want to innovate in that space as well, because you can aggressively define the hardware and the software, and that's what Apple's all about. But anyway, the ARM chips are designed for mobile devices, and Macs, like Windows-based PCs, are, obviously there's mobile chips, but they're, this is a desktop it's a legacy operating system.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes, sir.
My connection seems fuzzy.
Okay. You want to reconnect?
And I just realized I had to temporarily unplug the Ethernet cable from my computer today. Do you mind if I plug that back in?
Oh, go right ahead. I'll go on a rant here.
Right.
So, as someone that's a Mac user, it's interesting because this is going to, I think, for the lower end devices, if we're talking about, and I'll go into this when Paul comes back too, but when we're talking about, like a MacBook Air or a MacBook like device, do you need to reboot it now?
Sorry.
Okay. Are you back?
Yep.
Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you. So here's a question for you, right? When we're talking about like a MacBook, right, or a MacBook
Right.
Air, I don't see any problem with this, right? I think having your own chip that's better, I guess, better refined for battery life, and is able to kind of do core balancing and things like that. That's made for the operating system specifically. It's not
there are so many unknowns.
There are, tremendous amount, right? But if we're going to go with a positive, but on the
I don't mean it as positive or negative. I mean, this is literally just an unknown. Like, if we're going to speculate, like, where would they start? Yeah, a MacBook would be the place to start, right? Like a low end entry level device, right?
But the discussion is not necessarily that it's only going to be on those low end devices, right?
That's the unknown. So that's one of the unknowns. There's many unknowns. So one of the things that has come up as Microsoft and Qualcomm have worked to bring Windows 10 to ARM is that these ARM chips do not really work well with these legacy operating systems. And so there's a lot of customization that has to occur. And there's a big performance hit when you try to emulate x86 code. Now, one of the big problems that we've had in the Windows side of the fence is ARM devices can only run 32-bit Intel apps, x86 apps.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of software out there today is 64-bit. Now, on the Mac side, with which I'm not as familiar, but my understanding is that they have gone completely 64-bit with their Mac operating system at whatever point. I don't know if it's Catalina or before Catalina.
I think it was pre-Catalina.
So they, Apple, as we know, is very aggressive with this kind of thing. But Apple has also been compiling Mac OS on ARM for several years already on the A series chips, right? So the one benefit that they have, and this is where all the unknowns come in, is they know this is coming down the pike. They've been working on this. They're 64-bit, right? They need to be able to run 64-bit apps. They need to be able to tell developers there's a little switch. It will happen automatically. You recompile your app in Xcode. It will compile out to ARM. It will be native. It will run great, probably, we don't know what kind of progress they made, because one of the big things that could happen here is because a lot of us, like you said, and I believe this too. I mean, they'll probably start with the notebooks. Maybe they would. Maybe you could draw the line like pro, non-pro. So like a Mac Mini, a MacBook Air, those things will be on ARM in a year. But
Mhm.
the pro devices, they might need more time, or maybe they never come because they're like workstations and they need to be on Intel. Who knows? But one of the big unknowns is what if they've done it? Like what if they can bring the entire product line over? And maybe it doesn't take a year, maybe it's 2 3 years, whatever. But I mean, what if they have literally evolved this thing in secret
The operating
to
system,
run no the chips
the chips. Okay.
to like in other words like everyone like one of the things that didn't work on the Windows side was the first generation, actually the first two generations technically, of Qualcomm Snapdragon chips that were put in ARM PCs on the Windows side were the same chips they had in smartphones, and they were terrible. They were just terrible. Battery life was epic, you know, but they couldn't run apps at an acceptable speed. So since then, Qualcomm and now Microsoft, in partnership with Qualcomm, have both developed their own separate lines of chips that are kind of a fork of those smartphone chips that have been changed to better meet the needs of like a Windows PC. The battery life goes down. It has to, but the performance goes up.
Yeah.
What if Apple, because Apple doesn't do things publicly, they do it secretly. Apple would have been running this thing on whatever A6, A7, A8, whatever those things are, and said, man, the performance is really terrible because Mac OS is this legacy system. What if we could evolve the OS and evolve the chipset so that we have special versions of these chips that will be in the Macs? Like it won't be the same one in an iPhone. Just like in an iPad Pro, you have like a special version of each chip that is, slightly different. These ones, maybe they're dramatically different, right? So, honestly, this is what makes it so interesting. We don't know what they're going to announce.
Yeah.
It may be very vague, you know. It
I'm
may not.
assuming it's gonna be vague. Because here's the
Well,
other thing, right? You're gonna need
yeah,
an overall operating system redesign here if this is the
uh,
direction you're headed. If you are
well,
looking at doing
but
your own
that might have already
chipset,
happened. I mean,
it's
that's
quite
my
yeah,
point.
no,
Like,
no, no, yeah, exactly. It
I
might have already happened in secret that we don't
yeah,
know. But the current how the Mac OS functions currently in its current
yeah.
state, I I don't see them just having the same operating system and just maybe attempting
Yeah.
emulation. If they're going this direction, it's going to be a total redesign. We're looking at going back to, I
So,
mean, when they went to OS 10.
see,
This is the
I don't
beginning
think
of
they
the
have to
next
do
version.
that. I think that OS 10 by nature was cross-platform, and it was one of those things that allowed them to go to Intel. They didn't, they didn't completely re-architect Mac OS 10 to run on Intel. They just recompiled it. I mean, the from unless you're an assembly language programmer, like from the perspective of any developer, it's no different. Like it just so. I mean, I have a feeling ARM is going to go similarly, and because they own the ARM chips, I mean, they've been doing this. It's possible whenever they did make that switch to 64-bit was done in part because ARM is 64-bit and we have to do 64-bit.
Mm,
What look, the very least they can do is say, they're not going to do this, but they could come out and say, look, none of that stuff that you have today is going to run. Like none of it.
yeah. Yeah.
But we're going to let developers compile to 64-bit. It's not even a checkbox. It just happens automatically when you get this new version of Xcode. So all the Adobes of the world, everyone who makes apps, Microsoft, et cetera, they don't have to do anything. They just have to recompile it and it will work on ARM. That would be the least they could do. I cannot see them doing that. There has to be, like we see on the Windows side, some form of emulation. And because Apple is natively 64-bit today, it has to be 64-bit emulation, which is something we don't have on the Windows side yet, although they say they're working on it. That is going to that comes with an additional performance penalty, by the way, at least on the Windows side. And so again, like you may be right that maybe part of the re-architecting is that they've written like a metal style layer of the operating system that's designed to run this emulated software at better speeds or something. Who knows? But I really think that for this to work, it's going to require them to extensively evolve their A series chips specifically for Macs. I think that has to be a huge part of it. And like I said, all we can do is sit here and speculate. I mean, because we really don't know what they're doing exactly. But the range of potential choices here are kind of amazing. Like I'm really curious to see what they do. Yeah.
No, so here's the other thing, right? Off the bat, you know that they're going to whatever this device ends up being, right? Let's say it's a hypothetical MacBook. Let's say,
yeah,
just go with that.
Yep. Yeah, they'll bring back the MacBook brand, small computer.
Yeah, so they'll bring that. Yep. Let's say they bring that back. You know what the big selling point of that thing is going to be? The freaking battery life.
Yes.
I mean, these guys are going to be able to do a real 12-hour battery life.
And by the way, we should point out that one of the big benefits of going to ARM, if they do this, and I think they will, is that it will make running iPad apps, almost seamless and more efficient. And so you'll have this device that has really great battery life. It may run traditional Mac apps like Intel type Mac apps slowly, but it will run like iPad apps full speed.
Yeah.
And maybe this is part of the goal. I mean, the other thing, just not to get out on a weird tangent, but I mean, because this is really getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, because again, we have no idea what they're really doing. But once you have the Mac on ARM, and once you have developers just natively compiling their apps to ARM, theoretically, that means they could run on the iPad Pro.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, iOS is based on Mac OS. I mean, there's iPad. They did just split iPad OS off from iOS. Why did they do that? Maybe they're going to add some stuff into that makes the APIs that are missing from iOS/iPad OS are going to be added to iPad OS, and so you could have. I'm trying to think what you would want, like what would be the point of that. But I guess like the desktop version of the Microsoft Office applications, you could get the real Photoshop, the real Illustrator.
Yeah.
And then, that goofy "what's a computer" ad suddenly starts to make sense, because this thing could become a computer. So I don't know, maybe, whether that happens or not, but having everything on ARM makes sense for Apple. It's another part of the stack that they can control. They love that. But it's also something they can market to users,
exactly.
That it just works,
But I mean, obviously, like you said, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but maybe the touchscreen MacBook shows up here. Maybe you have, maybe you're able to run the Mac OS on the iPad now. If you want to do like, you may be able to go into Pro mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different options here that you can, once it's using natively the same chipset.
Yeah. One of the when Apple was known to have been working on a tablet, a lot of the early fake pitches that people would make showed a tablet with a Mac OS desktop on it, right? With the Mac OS 10 style dock, and and they were looking at the way that Microsoft brought Windows to tablets. They were like, oh, maybe that's what the iPad will be, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the iPad was iOS instead, but
I think it's very interesting that these rumors are, it's actually happening, and it's obviously this. I anticipate this was a leak internally from Apple,
so let's
kind of get people talking right before WWDC.
I mean, of all the stuff we talked about, so remember when Apple was rumored to have been bringing, at the time they were calling them iOS apps, but we'll call them iPad apps, to the Mac. And then that, whatever year that was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever, they announced this thing, Catalyst. And in the version of Windows 10, in the version of Mac OS that they released that fall, there were 4 apps that were iPad apps that Apple made that were included in the operating system, right? It was like Stocks, News, whatever the other two were. Doesn't matter. Yeah. And then eventually they brought more. Remember, they brought the Apple Music app, and all that stuff came the next year.
iTunes.
But a year later.
iTunes, Apple Music, podcast app.
Yep. So for what they did was they gave developers basically a year to kind of play with this technology, see how that looked, test it with their devices. And then a year later, they opened it up for everybody. And you and I both believe this was going to be the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And the reality of Catalyst has been kind of underwhelming, right? For some reason. And I think about this. it still seems like such a great idea to me. If you're an Apple guy, you're running these apps on your you have an iPad, you have a Mac, you have a phone. Why on earth would you not want to run some? There are some great apps on the iPad that just aren't available on the Mac otherwise. And whatever. So it hasn't gone all that well. So I guess what I'm asking is, like, is it possible? Like, we're sitting here, like, we're really dreaming up this crazy future. We've gone really kind of far down a road where they might not even go there. I mean, what do you think the least they could possibly do is? Like, in other words, we're like, they're going armed. They're getting rid of Intel. Like, they're going to bring Mac apps to the iPad. It's crazy.
Yeah.
What do you think they're really going to do? Like, what's the least amount of, like, for this to meet the needs of the rumor,
Yeah.
like, what's the very least they could announce?
The very least that they could announce, maybe a new device.
Yeah, like a specific Mac, like
a
one
specific
Mac.
For this.
And it doesn't offer any compatibility.
No compatibility at all. Just
no. I mean, I want to say that is a possibility. Their answer might be that the user experience is so terrible that we're not going to do that to you, and they're going to point at Windows 10 and ARM to show why that's the case. And they're going to say, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make it completely seamless for developers all they have to do is recompile the app, and it will work on your new computer. And that computer's not coming out for another year. So you have 1 year to watch and see as developers do this, and then when it comes out, the apps will be there. Yeah. I think that is literally the very least they can do, and I hope to God that's not what it is.
Well, here's why I kind of here's what I see, right?
Yeah.
You have there's a tremendous amount of people that, like me, they are on the MacBook Pro line, right?
Right.
I have an i9 MacBook Pro sitting in my office.
Jeez.
Right? I mean, insanity. How can you replicate that? How are you going to be able to say, okay, guys, this new chip, it's not going to be as quick, but, here you go. You're really not. You're not going to.
No, you can't. You can't. No. You can't do that. They have to be able to stand up and show a chart where it says in the most common workloads, this thing is just as fast or faster. Plus, it gets double the battery life or whatever it is. They can't sell a pro class device that doesn't meet what they're already doing, right? They can't.
But
so
majority
that's
of
why
sales.
I think your idea of a MacBook makes sense to me. Bring back the MacBook. It could be the little 12-inch guy, no fans, super efficient, 25 hours of battery life, designed for the executive that just needs the stuff that Apple makes. It's like Mac OS plus iLife plus iWork.
Everything's there.
And that's it.
Yeah, everything's there. Everything is there.
And by the way, there is a little bit of a market. One of the advantages that Apple really has, I guess it's two advantages. It's just the appeal of this company to its audiences. Developers will quickly embrace this, although Catalyst should quickly embrace this, and so will their best customers. People will buy this just because it's a new Apple thing and they can't wait to get it.
Yeah, and it's so well. But here's the other problem. Now you got three different operating systems, 4 different operating systems technically.
Yeah,
right. You got iOS.
Really,
well, 3. You got iOS. You have this bizarro thing that you're making.
Watch. You have Apple TV. You have.
Yeah. Well,
I know what you're saying. For computing platforms.
For computing platforms. You have 3 separate computing platforms, and now you have to support with the concept that one of them is getting phased out. And it's the one that everybody's using. So okay, so right. What does this do? I mean, as a marketing standpoint, right? As a marketing standpoint, you're essentially telling everybody, hey, by the way, that thing you're using now, in a couple of years, that's going to be gone. So look at this.
You don't say it like that. No. So I think if that's going to happen, then the marketing point is the name of the system doesn't matter. It's going to run all your apps, right? So if the platform goes away, but it still runs all your apps, who cares? It's the same. Whatever. I mean, so this conversation is impossible to have because we're just speculating. We have no idea what they're really going to announce. By the way, that week could come and go with nothing. I mean, that would be miserable if that happened. But
listen, it could be nothing. But this does fall in line with a lot of things. One example, right? Apple is working on a like the iMessenger, right? The messages,
Hmm.
now it's called
Hmm.
messages, but that is still running on the old architecture. They haven't brought over the iOS styling over
Yeah.
to this with
Right.
Catalyst. They haven't done that. That's going to be next, right? So right now, if you
Hmm.
look at it, all their internal applications are moving over to this platform.
Right.
It's
Right.
going to be an easy transition for them. I'm thinking out loud here. To they're not going to
Yeah.
have to redevelop everything as much as people think they will, considering they've been slowly
So,
doing this for a couple of years.
do you foresee any situation in which a future generation of Pro devices, right, which would be MacBook Pros plus iMac, I guess what they have, iMac Pros and Mac Pros, continue using Intel, but they also ship with whatever Apple's A series processor is, right? And that it's a dual system, and that's the only way to get the performance on those things, that they have to use both. Is
They're going to
that
have to use
does that even
both
make
Intel.
sense?
I don't know. I
Yeah, I don't know either. I
I
don't know.
don't know what the answer there is. I mean, you're obviously not going to get the performance that you can on an i9 compared to what they could do with their ARM chips, unless we don't know, unless they
Unless
developed,
I know that's the thing. Unless everyone, and
unless
that is literally the thing. What if a future Mac Pro is a dual CPU, A series, whatever, heavily modified, dedicated graphics, and that is powerful enough to take the place
what
of
if
an
it's
i7 or an
AMD?
i9. I mean, I
What if it's an AMD?
well, I don't know. This is all about them doing it. Just I really I feel like the real impetus for this is them controlling the stack. I mean, why? The reason they went to Intel, and this was the reason they went to PowerPC as well, was that the chipset they were using before, and the companies that made those chipsets, weren't meeting their needs. PowerPC had fallen behind the Intel stuff, and it was getting impossible to hide that. And the power, I think it was the G5 at the time, was so energy hungry, you couldn't make a laptop that got better than a couple of hours of battery life. It just
Yeah.
wasn't working. So, Intel was there. Intel, they it wasn't like they made special chips for Apple. They just used the same chips we use on the Windows side. This time's a little different because this time it's their own chips.
Yeah.
They can do whatever they want to these things, and they can make whatever changes are necessary.
Yeah, but
And I
they're gonna have
really
to get into
look.
the
I
horsepower game, and that's something that Apple doesn't really do. They're not in the pissing
Yeah.
contest of talking about the specs of their chips and the
Well,
performance of as much as what Intel does and what AMD does. Now they're gonna get into that segment
yeah,
of
but
user base.
this may. I don't know. We already see such amazing creative apps on the iPad today that this makes the Mac more appealing to that audience, and those apps could perform even better on such a system. I don't. Again, it's I, it you can't we can't. There's no way to definitively speak about any of this because it's not. We
Listen,
just don't
imagine
know what they're going
Microsoft.
to say.
Microsoft starts doing it with their own ARM-based chips, their own custom chips now on their Surfaces.
Well, they require Qualcomm. It's a partnership with
It's a
Qualcomm,
partnership
so
with them, but
um, this is
but
a huge
it's
advantage for Apple. You know,
no, it is
well,
a
I mean,
huge
the
advantage
recent
for Apple, but Microsoft is capable of doing it because they do have a partnership with Qualcomm.
Yeah, but it's not the same. I mean, you get, it's that chip is weird to me because, um, I guess it was a year before that Qualcomm announced that and Qualcomm has split their ARM chips into different families. They make different versions of these chips, not just for different types of smartphones, but also they have specialty chips for like IoT devices, smart speakers, smart watches. They've also branched out into all these different directions, and one of those directions is the PC. And so one of the things that I don't remember the chips, 8CX, I think it was. Um, those devices were coming out, and there were like two of them, but they were coming out the year that Microsoft announced the Surface Pro X with its own custom SQ1, I think was the name of that chip. Microsoft knew what Qualcomm was doing, and they still made their own chip. Not their, I mean, with Qualcomm, but I think what they understood was that the market opportunity for Qualcomm was so small that if they didn't take control of this and kind of have a real say in what was happening, the resulting chipset was never going to be good enough. And the SQ1 is almost certainly not good enough either. There's going to be an SQ2 and whatever. We'll see where that goes. But the real fear for any of those guys at Microsoft, Qualcomm, or anyone who is a fan of that stuff is that Apple's going to come out the gate V1 and just get it right.
Yeah.
That by doing this in secret for so many years and not shipping products that were heavily handicapped performance-wise or whatever, kind of ruining the brand, right? They'll have an advantage.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is a big move
Yeah.
for them, a tremendously large move for them. I'm curious to see how they do it. But again, we don't know how they're going to deploy this.
I know. I know. I can't wait to find out.
They can't turn around and be like, hey, by the way, guys, Intel out. We're just going with this. Unless they do.
Yeah.
Unless they do, and that would be nuts. I don't know if it's in a negative.
I mean, they can't say that. They still have, at the very least, one more year of Intel supplying them with chips. I don't think. Look, even if they're able to go all A series, it's going to be a several-year process. It has to be. It can't. Going to Intel was much easier because those chips were literally better.
Yeah.
This time is an issue.
Listen, they announced this in 2001, right? They went over to Intel. 20 years later, we're looking at a whole different.
No. It was 2005. 2001 was the original version of Mac OS 10.
The original Mac OS, yeah, for Intel, yeah.
No,
I thought it
for Intel. No, it's 2005.
2005. Okay.
Yeah.
Why do I think 2001?
That was the first version of OS 10.
Of OS 10. Got it.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff. On the other side, Intel, and it's on Thurrott.com right now. They have a chip that's looking to compete heavily with ARM. This is their newest processor. It's a 10 nanometer, correct? Very small.
I'm not entirely sure. So there is one big core that is like a traditional Intel core, core series core. That is a 10 nanometer part. There are 4 smaller cores, and this kind of big small architecture is similar, to what ARM does. Those are actually based on the Atom chipset, a new generation of the Atom chipset, and I don't know if they're 10 nanometer or smaller. I'm not sure.
So it's a hybrid essentially.
Yeah.
It's not like a pure ARM chipset. It's a hybrid processor, which is similar to what they do. Samsung, I know, is going to be one of the first to have this in their line.
Yeah. So Samsung at probably CES announced a ARM-based, I think it's a 2-in-1, but laptop, whatever, Galaxy something. I don't remember that. Nobody buys these things. I don't know, but whatever it is, it runs Windows 10 on ARM. And then at some point they announced an Intel-based version, and now we know it's coming out this month, and it's going to run this new Intel chip. And so, without running either one of these things, I think we can speculate that battery life will probably be better on the ARM version, and the performance will probably be better on the Intel version. But regardless of how that works out, the compatibility will be much better on the Intel version. And that's compatibility with apps.
Do you think with all this news, obviously Intel they were not able to make it in the mobile market. That ship has sailed at this point, right? We know that. But now with, go back to the Apple and ARM stuff, and now this, and with AMD, coming out with an unbelievable lineup of chips, Intel's kind of in second place as far as, the necessities go.
Yeah.
This is not.
Yeah, the volume part of the market is thin and light mobile, and look, as far as workhorse chips go, like the U series Intel Core. I guess we're on Gen 10 today. The type of thing you'd find in a laptop, the type of chip I have in my NUC here, absolutely spectacular. Like, it's great. But if you want like a super thin, fanless device that gets like 22 hours of battery life or whatever, you need something a little more efficient. And this has always been the trick, is kind of bridging that gap between performance and efficiency. Qualcomm and Microsoft are kind of trying to scale it up from the bottom. Intel has been working their way down. Intel, I don't know if it's Celeron or Atom or whatever, but they had these chipsets for mobile devices that went absolutely nowhere. You may remember several years ago, there were like a couple of Android tablets that used these chips, and that was about it. It just kind of went nowhere. Their networking business went nowhere. They sold that off. And inexplicably, and this is just an engineering embarrassment, it took Intel several years to move off of 10 nanometer, well, actually off of 14 first, and then to
14, yeah.
10. They've had a really hard time scaling their chips down, and it's just been an embarrassment. You know, when you look at the Qualcomm, the Samsung, the Apple stuff, that stuff went 10, 7, 5. You know,
Yeah.
like they're tiny and they're super efficient. Now that little chip that you could, get caught between your teeth probably isn't powerful enough to run a computer, which is why they're adapting those things for that purpose. But I mean, that's the big part of the market. So I think, Intel, when you think about like the Pro lineup on Apple or any premium PC like HP or Dell or Lenovo, whatever, those devices are probably very lucrative, in that they're high margins, high profits, but they don't sell very much. And then but the mobile devices like phones, tablets, little 2-in-1s, and then this next gen, hopefully we'll see whether it's Windows 10 on ARM or whatever Apple's doing with the Mac. I mean, that's the volume part of the market. That's why that's why this failure is so terrible for Intel. I mean, they've never seeded the performance thing, although actually maybe they have, right? The new AMD stuff is pretty good. But they've given up the mainstream majority of the market, and
Yeah.
it's incredible.
It is incredible. It's incredible. AMD, on the other hand, they've been able to rebound. You know, they had a
I
couple of
know, which
years
is
where they
also
were.
incredible.
I mean, we always joke about it, right, on the show. How do you keep your room warm in the winter? Get a AMD chip. You know, get a
I
computer
don't
that's an
know.
AMD chip. But they've been able to really unlock the horsepower
Yeah.
battle against Intel, and Intel has fallen behind again.
So I don't remember if I've ever said this publicly, but one of the things that Terry Myerson told me, because I really questioned the decision to move Windows 10 to ARM, was that Microsoft needed some other company to show up and give Intel competition. That if the worst thing that happened was that Intel made its chips more efficient, then fine. Microsoft saw the future as these always on, always connected computers, and Intel was just performance, performance, performance. And he said, look, I'd go AMD, but that company is circling the drain. And that was, 3-4 years ago, whenever that was. But things have really turned around
From 3-4
for
years
AMD.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
originally their approach to counter Intel was more cores, right?
Yeah.
That's what they were
Yeah.
doing. They were doing just more
Right.
cores, more cores, more cores. These things
Mm-hmm.
had, uh, 12 cores, I'm saying years ago.
Right.
When they were doing eight cores, 12 cores when Intel was
Yeah.
not. They were
Intel was
doing,
stuck on 2 or 4. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Intel was still beating them. They were
Yep.
still able to beat them as far as the overall performance went. But now, not only are
I
these
don't know
things
what happened.
fast, they're also small chips. I mean, they're doing the 5-nanometer chips, they're doing the 7, they're doing 14. I mean, they have a large
Yeah.
variety of chips, but some of these, I mean, these are, like on the server
I
side, for
wonder.
example, there's 64 chips, 64
I
thread,
feel like
32-bit chips.
Intel is in risk of turning into IBM.
Who's this,
Excuse me.
Intel?
Well,
Wait, you're cracking open a
Intel,
beer?
yeah. No, it's a sparkling water. In that, they'll still be around, but like these guys they were technology. They were personal computing. They were it. Intel was the microprocessor company.
Yeah.
This ARM stuff has been around for like 30 years.
Yeah.
It was nothing for 20 of those years. I mean,
Well,
like nothing.
they had a chance to develop something. Intel
Yep.
had a great opportunity to develop something
But the
with that
truth is,
architecture.
Intel's failings go back years and years and years. Intel also, when the first tablet PCs were coming out in 2002, Intel didn't have anything that could power those devices efficiently, because obviously for a slate type tablet like an iPad, you don't want fans, but those things all had fans. The Intel chips were terrible. Intel wanted to push the world to Itanium for
Yeah.
64-bit computing, and it was AMD that came around and said, no, we're going to extend x86 with a 64-bit instruction set. It was so popular and so successful, Intel had to adopt AMD's approach. And that's what we're all running today. It's all thanks to AMD.
I mean, look at these
This
Ryzen
is the company
chips.
that should be the worldwide leader, and it's like I don't know when the last time they were actually leading at anything.
I would
You know?
say 8 years ago.
Well, I mean, okay.
Right? I mean, but I mean, I'm looking at these Ryzen, the Ryzen Threadripper, for example, right? The third
Yeah,
generation one. 64 cores, Paul.
nice 64 cores.
32 cores. Oh,
Right.
that's just the mid-range one.
Sure.
I mean, that
I
is
know.
it is ridiculously fast. Now, here's the other thing though. It's not that much faster than an i9. They still have
Right.
that. They're still suffering with that. And obviously, the Intel chips perform a little bit better, efficiency-wise. But this is the evolution of this. And I think for Intel, they stayed in the middle. And AMD has gone to one extreme, and the ARM
Right.
chipsets are another extreme, and Intel is kind of stuck in the middle, treading water.
Yeah. Right. Well, the advantage they have is when you look at a Windows PC today or a Mac. I mean, they're necessary. Attempts to use other chipsets so far haven't worked. I mean, AMD has seen some success, obviously, on the Windows side, but by and large, if you look at any PC maker's website, it's 80% Intel at least, depending on the company, and whatever. But the PC market is not what it was, and it's not going to disappear, but 250 to 300 million units a year compared to 2 billion units a year on just phones, and I think when you look at all the devices that ARM chips are selling in, I mean, if you include tablets, IoT, smart home devices, et cetera, I mean, it's billions. It's just billions. And I don't, I've always referred to Intel as kind of the microprocessor giant, but I mean, they probably haven't been number one for several years now. We just didn't notice it happen.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very curious how they do this. Paul, I have a question for you. Okay. Hang on, I had your site open here, and I just lost it. Jeez, I'm losing my mind here, Paul. As someone that's kind of in the thick of this, are you getting any AMD-based laptops when you do your reviews, or they're generally all Intel still? Are you seeing a change?
I have not gotten one. It's not impossible that it would happen these days. I mean,
that shift hasn't come to you yet.
It just has not happened to me personally, but they're out there. I mean, obviously they're out there. No, not yet.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because
I'm curious. I'd love to review something like that.
Yeah, and you're not, when we talk about computing, like I'm in the process. I have to build a new production machine, right? That's where I'm at right now,
Mm-hmm.
and and everybody, I put it out there talking about the 10th gen chips that haven't been released fully yet, and it's been a very sloppy deployment for Intel on that side. I still cannot get my hands on the i9 or i7. I guess listen. Obviously, it's due to availability, and there's an issue.
Yeah,
in China,
I was going to say
with
this is a tough time.
Very tough time.
Yep.
But when I posted that, everybody's generally, I mean, I would say out of 10, 8 of them were, "Why aren't you buying an AMD?"
Yeah,
and I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer because obviously right now I'm using Intel and everything works properly. But I thought that to myself, why am I not using it?
Right.
And it got me thinking, we're not seeing a lot of the conversation around the laptop side. Obviously, on the PC side, we know you can build a awesome gaming machine. But on the laptop side, there's nothing.
I get a lot of, announcement material from PC makers right before they announce new devices. So, Dell has done this. Lenovo, have they done this? Maybe to a lesser degree. HP has done this. Oftentimes they'll have either the same computer or just they'll call it something different, but where you have a choice of Intel or AMD chips. But that's still kind of the exception. And the problem for AMD is you don't really see one of the companies saying, look, this product line is only going to be AMD,
Yeah.
Like HP will come out with like a, whatever, Envy something, whatever. The Envy line from now on is only going to be AMD. Like you just don't see that. Um, and maybe it's a capacity problem. Maybe AMD is just not big enough. But I do think it's interesting, and it's notable that a lot of those companies, the biggest ones especially, are at least making AMD available as an option where they think people might choose those. If you go back and look at, for example, I think, yeah, HP, Lenovo both recently had gaming PC announcements. I bet you will find AMD options in there if you want
Oh, I'm sure it's
them.
there.
Yeah, but they
It's
won't be
interesting.
AMD only. Like you won't find one that's just AMD.
Yeah.
Probably.
Talking about gaming today, it's a PS5 announcement.
I know. I
I
can't
believe
wait.
at what, 4 o'clock, right?
4 o'clock.
4 p.m. East.
Yep.
Give us what you think. Your thoughts on this?
um, there's been a lot of information. This is like the Apple thing. There's a lot of we don't know yet. So I think when you look at the next generation of video game consoles, what we're going to find overall is that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are probably pretty similar. Sony made a lot of news when they had that Unreal Engine demo, but Unreal Engine is going to work on Xbox too, right? So, one of the things that Microsoft mentioned just yesterday is they have games because they're running. Of course, they are because it's not PlayStation specific, but that demo was really impressive, and it was apparently running on a PS5. And I think the game demos that we're going to see later today are likewise going to be really impressive. So I always hold up this thing that Microsoft has still said as recently as yesterday, although when pressed, they kind of take a little step back. But I think the point of this generation literally is 4K all the time, 60 frames a second or better all the time. And the way I would rate these consoles will be the percentage of games that actually achieve that in real life on either one. So, we'll see. But there'll be
It
games with
is.
higher refresh rates or frame rates.
Oh, this thing's going to be a beast. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we know
Yep.
what they're doing with augmented reality and that kind of
No, we know
feature-driven
Microsoft
stuff?
is not doing it at all. And Sony has actually seen some success with VR. The PSVR stuff has sold in the millions, and so I would assume that they're going to do something, but that doesn't seem like the type of thing that they would release day one. There's so much, just the process of getting this thing out the door, I think, and getting enough games is probably going to be the focus for this year. But you could picture next year or maybe the year after there being a PS5 VR, at least VR solution.
Yeah, this is going to be this generation is no longer about content consumption on these devices. These are strictly gaming machines at this point. I
Yes,
think both of
that's
them
true.
saw. You know what's interesting? Sony was very successful with going towards the content-driven side with the PS3. I think
Yeah,
for many
yeah,
people that was a major selling point for them is
right.
that this thing was a Blu-ray player. Same thing with the
Yep.
PlayStation 2. They were that was a DVD player. That is gone. Microsoft was a great example of how not to do it when it came to their fan
Yeah.
base. They
Yeah.
realize that people don't care about consuming media on this. They just want to play the games. And
Sure.
Sony was quick to adapt to that with the PlayStation 4, and Microsoft
Yeah, but
figured
you
it
know what?
out. But
The world is so different today. People consume media in very specific ways now, and yeah, look, those apps will all appear in the consoles, whatever. But booting up a Battleship to watch Netflix is not the best way to do it.
yeah,
So you have a little silent device of any kind. You could have your TV probably has it built in, so that's a much more efficient way to do that. I will say one of the things that's going to be interesting in this generation of consoles, aside from the performance and graphics quality and all that, is that both of these sides will always have like the exclusive content and yada 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 and all that stuff. But the games that are cross-platform, which is the vast majority, we're going to see a lot more cross-play. I think this gen, and that's something that finally started happening pretty late in the game in the current gen. But we're going to see a lot more of that in the next gen, and that's things like Call of Duty guys on PlayStation 5 and Xbox. Why on earth would they not be playing against each other? Or integrated whatever
yeah.
in whatever fashion in multiplayer games. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I think that helps take kind of the heat off in some ways. I mean, some guys will always go Sony because of particular games or they just like the brand, whatever. And some guys will always go Microsoft for the same reason. But um, for the guys or gals, whatever, people who are playing the majority of games, especially games that are collaborative or fighting games or multiplayer games, whatever. Yeah, why not? Let them play. Let them play against each other. I
Yeah.
think that should be a nice trend.
Yeah. I do like the overall design choice for. I'm just going through these photos. The controller design. They've done a good job with
Yeah,
this.
yeah, it
But
looks nice.
listen, it's gonna be the thing's gonna sell by the millions. So I don't think anybody's concerned with it.
Yeah, I mean, God, hopefully the world, you know, picks up itself from this disaster, moves on. But I suspect whatever they're able to make, they're
Yeah.
going to sell. They're,
Yeah.
you're not going to see PlayStation 5 sitting on shelves anywhere.
No. No.
You know,
Before we wrap it up, I had something else here. Paul, do you have anything before we wrap it up and go into our bonus show? Anything that I'm missing
um,
here?
no, I mean, Android 11 beta one's out. I just installed it on the
Yes.
phone. I'm going to I'll take a look at that after the show. I don't think that's a monumental thing, but I hope it was obvious from what we talked about earlier. I'm really excited about what Apple's going to announce, and one of the things I'm curious about is like Microsoft Build was just available to everybody. Apple has a developer program you have to buy into to get access to betas and stuff like that, and a lot of the WWC, most of the WWC content in the past has been restricted to those people.
Yeah.
So in the past, you used to be able to go see the build sessions on video. Anyone could do it later. I hope that Apple is going to open that stuff up to everyone. I'm going to go try to figure that out after the show too. I'd like to
Yeah.
see that be open. I'm really curious about what their plans are on the developer side. But yeah, I mean that's most of it.
All right.
That's where my
Uh,
head's at.
that's where your head's at. Mine too. Uh, guys, if you want to listen to our bonus show, we're going to record this live right after this. You go to patreon.com/whatthetech. You can fund us there as little as $1 per episode. You get access to this bonus stuff that we do. For all things Paul, go to Thurrott.com. It is pouring here, by the way. Holy moly. Go to
Yeah,
Thurrott.com for all things
we've got some of
Paul.
that.
You can follow Paul on Thurrott, at Thurrott on Twitter. You can follow me at Andrew Zarian. And of course, remember to subscribe to the podcast where everywhere podcasts are available, including YouTube. If you're watching this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and call it a day. All right, guys. We'll see you all next time. Take care.